Assalamu alaikum. Let me introduce myself. My name is Putri Veronica from Management 22A. My NPM is 22,411,040. Ownership concentration. In-depth explanation. Ownership concentration refers to the degree to which shares of a company are held by a small number of shareholders. In companies with high ownership concentration, a significant portion of the company's equity is owned by a few individuals, families, institutions, or even the state. These shareholders often wield substantial influence over corporate decisions, including board appointments, strategic direction, and executive compensation. Ownership concentration is a critical factor in corporate governance as it determines who controls the company and how power and accountability are distributed within the firm. In many cases, concentrated ownership implies control. Shareholders with a large proportion of shares can exert direct influence over management, and in some instances, they may also be part of the board or executive team. This is particularly true in family-owned businesses, founder-led firms, or state-owned enterprises, where control is tightly held. The advantage of this structure is that it often ensures long-term strategic consistency and a strong alignment between ownership and management interests. However, high ownership concentration can also lead to entrenchment. Dominant shareholders may use their power to serve their own interests, possibly at the expense of minority shareholders. This phenomenon is known as principal-principal conflict, as opposed to the more commonly discussed principal-agent conflict that arises in dispersed ownership models. In such cases, the controlling party might resist changes, suppress dissent, or extract private benefits that are not shared with all investors. In contrast, firms with dispersed ownership, where shares are spread out among many small investors, typically rely on a strong board of directors and external mechanisms like financial disclosures, market discipline, or regulatory oversight to monitor management. These firms may be more democratic but also more vulnerable to agency problems, as no single investor has enough stake to exert effective control or demand accountability from managers. Ownership concentration is influenced by several factors, including country-specific legal systems, investor protection laws, and cultural norms. For instance, in countries with weak legal protection for minority shareholders, investors may prefer concentrated ownership to better safeguard their investments. In contrast, countries with strong legal frameworks, like the United States or the United Kingdom, tend to have more dispersed ownership and greater emphasis on institutional monitoring and public governance practices. Ownership concentration also varies across industries. In capital-intensive industries, such as utilities, telecommunications, or heavy manufacturing, ownership is often more concentrated due to the need for long-term capital and control. In contrast, tech startups and service-oriented businesses may begin with concentrated ownership among founders and venture capitalists, but transition toward dispersed ownership as they scale and go public. The effects of ownership concentration on firm performance have been widely debated. Some studies suggest that concentrated ownership enhances performance by reducing managerial opportunism and promoting strategic discipline. Others argue that it can lead to inefficiencies, especially when controlling shareholders pursue goals and related to shareholder value, such as nepotism, excessive risk aversion, or self-dealing. The impact often depends on the type of controlling owner, whether they are active, passive, or possess strategic vision. In emerging markets, ownership concentration is often the norm due to underdeveloped capital markets, limited institutional investor presence, and family-dominated corporate landscapes. In such environments, concentrated ownership provides a mechanism for strong internal control in the absence of reliable external governance systems. However, this also increases the risk of expropriation of minority shareholders, a key concern in developing corporate governance frameworks in these regions. Dual-class share structures can reinforce
Self-determination
ownership concentration by giving
SDT,
certain
SDT
shareholders,
emphasizes three
typically
key
founders
elements that
or
foster
family
intrinsic
members,
motivation.
superior voting rights.
1.
This
Autonomy,
enables them
the
to
sense of
retain
having
control
control over
despite
one's
holding
work.
a smaller economic
2.
stake.
Competence,
While this
feeling
may
capable
protect
and effective
long-term
in
vision,
achieving goals.
it is controversial
3.
because it
Relatedness,
creates a
feeling connected and
misalignment
supported by
between
others.
voting power and
3.
economic
Psychological
risk.
benefits
Critics
of
argue
motivation.
that such structures
When motivation
reduce
is high,
accountability and
employees
can
experience several
entrench poor
psychological
leadership.
benefits.
In some cases,
Increased job
state ownership
satisfaction.
also
Motivated
results in
employees
concentrated
tend to be
control.
happier with their jobs,
State-owned
which leads
enterprises
to higher
SOS
performance.
often function
Better
under a
mental health.
concentrated
A
ownership
motivated
model where
workforce has
government
lower stress and
agencies
anxiety
retain a
levels because
majority
they feel
or
more
controlling
engaged and
stake.
fulfilled.
While this can help promote
Higher
public policy
productivity.
objectives
Employees
and
who are
stabilize
motivated are
critical
more likely
sectors,
to go above
it may
and beyond
also
in their
lead to
roles,
inefficiencies
leading to
due to
improved
political
results for both
interference,
individuals
lack
and
of
the
competition,
organization.
and inadequate
Conclusion.
incentives for performance.
Understanding
Ownership
the psychology of
concentration
motivation
has
is
important
essential for maintaining a
implications for
productive
dividend
and
policy
happy work
and
environment.
capital structure.
By
Controlling
fostering both
shareholders may
intrinsic
prefer
and
retained
extrinsic
earnings to
motivation,
reinvest in the company,
organizations can help
while
employees
dispersed
reach their full
shareholders might
potential, while
prioritize regular
individuals
dividend
can find more
payments.
satisfaction and
Similarly,
purpose in their
highly
work.
concentrated firms
Thank
may
you.
avoid taking on excessive debt to preserve control.